Welcome to the Masters of Resilience podcast. This show is an exploration of the unseen and unheard stories of adversity that shape the journeys of high performers. These conversations will help you better understand the mindset, habits, and behaviors that empower these exceptional leaders to endure the most challenging moments of their careers and emerge stronger than ever. Your hosts are Ryan Seeger and Mark Phillips. Let's dive in to more.
Jeremy, thank you for joining us at the Masters of Resilience podcast.
It's great to be here.
We appreciate the time and excited to hear more about your story and the work you're doing through the field school. I think to just jump right in, I'd love it if you could share a story with our audience about a moment or an experience in your life where you really feel like resilience had a big role to play in what you were able to accomplish.
Yeah. I think just diving into the field school story. So just to give people some context, This was 9 years ago that my wife and I led a team of people to start a intentionally diverse classical Christian school on the west side of Chicago. So the idea was, let's create a world-class school that's designed for children from low-income families. And that was just great idea, but how do you actually do that? And 9 years later, I can just point to, maybe the kind of year 0, year 1, year 5, now learning to endure a long time in something hard. This decision that we made to start the school has changed my career trajectory. It affected our finances as a family significantly. It forced me to grow as a leader. There's a lot of different stakeholders in a school, and now we have something like 60 employees. There's a lot of faith required to do something like this, or persistence. We are a very diverse school as well. And so learning to really work with people from different backgrounds, it has been an amazing privilege, but also a kind of trial in all sorts of different seasons. I think if I had to kind of give one story, there was a time during COVID where we had a number of really intense personnel changes. We had the principal of the school kind of had to step down in an emergency setting. And then not long after that, the kind of next person most responsible for the school after me, we needed to dismiss them immediately. And this was already at a really volatile time to run a school. And I just remember really, really long nights, lots of different important communication points, and just sort of feeling very alone in that. And God provided what we needed. Amazing people stepped up to help. But it was one of those times where you're this is not one long night of work or 1 week. It's month after month of really grueling trial, and this belief that what you do matters and the Lord sees it, and you're not going to regret doing the right thing. But it was really, really hard. It was really, really hard some of that time.
It's a season. Yeah, those seasons can be exceptionally challenging.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm sure there's more where that came from. Maybe as a bit more context, let's take a step back. The starting of the field school, I'm really passionate about that 0 to 1 season, shall we say, which sometimes can go longer than others. But tell us a little bit of your background and why you chose to jump in on the field school.
Yeah. So my parents worked overseas in China for the first 6 years of my life. And then I lived in different parts of the United States, had a really high family value for education. And then I was a philosophy major at a Christian college in Southern California. And I chose to do a program called Teach for America in Los Angeles. And I had read a book by Henry Nouwen about people with intellectual disabilities. And so I remember I checked this box in the application for the Teach for America program that said I would be willing to do special education. And if you check that box, you're definitely going to be doing special education. So that was a whole thing for me. I ended up getting a master's degree in special education. It was a great learning experience. But I taught at a school in Los Angeles that was one of the 10 lowest performing schools in California. And to give you a sense of that, there was not one student out of 1,100 who was on grade level in reading and math. And these are bright kids, creative, image bearers of God, like kids in any other school. But most of them were 2 grade levels behind. And the students in my room were, 3 and 4 grade levels behind. Half of the students wouldn't graduate from high school. And then the half that did, they're basically doing math at the level of 8th graders in, higher income suburban schools. And this just broke my heart. And it was striking how much Like we lived in the neighborhood not far from it, but it was not hard to drive, a couple miles away and be at either an elite private school or a really good school district and just feel like there was this kind of catastrophe in our midst that a lot of people weren't doing much about. And I felt grieved by this as a Christian. Like this should be something we are engaging in a systematic kind of profound way. So I moved to Chicago and started training special education teachers in Chicago. And a lot of the same stories about low-income schools. But something interesting about Chicago is the schools in Chicago are more racially segregated than they were in LA. And so I got to see up close the way that there'd be a school that was 99% African-American, and then you walk 2 blocks and it's 95% Latino students. Wow. And that's not good for anyone. That doesn't prepare them for professional life or college. And then I also got to see these kind of like 1 in 20 schools that move heaven and earth, have an extended school day, do all sorts of unique, pull all kinds of levers to help students do better. And they can grow test scores a lot, but what ended up kind of being shown was that these students get into college but don't persist through college. And it's because of a lot of soft skills and the kind of environmental change and all the ways that, as a parent, as a father now, I think about school's a part of the equation, but you need a lot of other things to be ready to succeed in life. And so that made me wanting to do a different thing. Like, what if there was an amazing school? What if you intentionally had middle and high income families in the school together so you're not so homogeneously low income? And then I learned about this educational philosophy called classical education, a kind of humanities, great books, liberal arts approach that, for some people is very native. Some people don't know that very well. But I just felt like it's the formation of the whole soul. It's not just doing better on the test. And it felt to me like that was the missing ingredient at some of these schools that were so focused on the test that they weren't preparing children to like thrive in other environments. You know, I'd say the last ingredient of this was my wife and I lived in the city in a more low-income neighborhood. And we had a number of friends at our church that all felt like we would like to stay in Chicago long-term with our kids. How is that going to work for their education? And there were just a number of different options, none of which felt really great. And so we had some friends that said, let's start a school together. And I had said, no, like we need to do that when we're 65 and we have a lot more experience and wealth and connections and, And there was this one guy that my wife and I bought a 4-flat in Chicago that we lived in and rented out the other apartments to some friends of ours. And they were kind of in the same boat. And they said, how about we do a family meeting to see if there's appetite for this?
Wow.
And that first meeting, there were 35 people there. It just felt electric in the room. And that's kind of like what got us going. But that was the backstory of like wanting a different model, intentionally diverse, really high quality, Christian, but welcoming to people from all different parts of the city.
So you have this family meeting, that's amazing. The first meeting for a school that didn't exist. You go back, I'm guessing because of your educational background, you were kind of being tapped or identified as the person to lead this. The founder is the language I use in the world of entrepreneurship. What was your emotion in that moment? Were you energized? Was it fearful?
It was really, so that meeting was a real watershed moment because prior to that, I felt all that I just said, like, this is impossible, guys. Like that's like building an airport or something. It just doesn't happen with a bunch of 20-year-olds. But I got really catalyzed, like thinking about planning that meeting and then the backgrounds of the different people that came was really energizing. It was actually so full in the house that we had a few people call in on speakerphone to like listen into the conversation. And what ended up happening providentially was 2 people came to that meeting who had just moved to Chicago from Indianapolis. And there's a school in Indianapolis that was kind of like what we wanted to be like. And there were, 15 years already into it. And they're like us. Half of their seats are reserved for children in poverty, and then they serve middle and high income families. So these 2 people knew that school really well. One of them had been on staff. Another one had sent their children to that school. So they come to the meeting and they're like, this is awesome. We've been grieving the loss of that school after moving here. Let's take a group to go see that school. And 10 people from that meeting then drove down to Indianapolis, observed the school. And 15 seconds in, I was like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Like, this is magnificent. Tears coming down my eyes. At the end of the day, my wife closed our car door and she's like, this needs to be our life's work.
Wow.
And from that point, we just got really into it. Now, at the time, I had a couple other jobs. I worked for a nonprofit and I was a a PhD student in theology at Wheaton College Graduate School. So we had some stuff going on, but God kind of brought a lot of people to help. I tell people in our first year, we had 9 people on staff work for free. And that's like emblematic of the whole culture in those founding years where people were willing to do whatever it took to kind of get this thing off the ground. And it needed that because it's a big operation. There's a number of different important roles, some specialty required. So it won't happen without a real group of people pulling together for it.
What's required, Jeremy, in those moments? Because like I said, that 0 to 1 process is fascinating. And in those moments, you're a leader, you're driving the ship, you're painting the vision. And these people are, out of the goodness of their hearts, out of the passion they have for educating children, giving you everything they have and expecting nothing in return. What's required of a good leader in those moments?
That's a good question. The first thing that comes to mind is a leader has to realize in almost every case, people aren't going to serve the cause more than the leader will. And so I think about, we were a young married couple. We bought this building, not really knowing totally what we were getting into as landlords and renovating a space. And a few of those people I mentioned came up to me and they said, we really want to get this off the ground. And the kind of first thing out of their mouth is, I'd be willing, like one of them said, I'd be willing to donate 30 hours a week for free to do this, to help us like get the word out and raise money and build the team. And then another person heard about that and she said, I want to work for free too. And then I was a little bit slower to it, but then my wife and I looked at our finances and it was like, we could do that for a season. I could do this just, no pay for a while. I ended up doing it 3 years. And that was powerful because it just means like everything I'm asking anyone else to put on the line, I have myself put on the line.
Yeah.
And I just see how that is a principle of leadership, like lead from the front, be willing to do any job, have a very, a kind of readiness to take a risk or to be the person who gets criticized. If you're willing to do that, it sets a culture for the whole team. If you're not willing to do that, it just won't. Other people won't do that. So that's one thing that comes to mind. Another thing that comes to mind with this group was the willingness to be shaped and influenced by the people that are there. And so I had a lot of ideas, my own kind of educational philosophy, my background, working at Teach for America. I had a lot like to bring to it, but there's a kind of give and take that makes it much more dynamic and interesting. And 2 things that come to mind for that are my friend saying, how about you just lead this parent meeting and let's see if that meeting is catalytic for something else. And I think about this story. There was this pastor named Jonathan Edwards in the early, he was a Puritan in the early United States. And he was a pastor. He was pretty comfortable. He finally liked where he was. He had a kind of ups and downs of life. And then what became Princeton University, it wasn't called that at the time. They call him up and they say, we think you should be the next president of our school. And he did not want to do that. But he thought, maybe I'm supposed to do that. So what he did is he called some friends and mentors and he called them to his hometown. And he said, here's the offer that I have. I honestly don't really trust myself to make the right decision. I want you to fast and pray and talk about it. And I'll answer any questions you have, but then I'm going to leave for a bit. You discuss it. I'll come back and you tell me what you think I'm supposed to do. And he leaves, they discuss it. He comes back, they say, we think you need to take this job. And he breaks down weeping. He starts crying because he really doesn't want to do it. The happy, sad part of that story is he goes to Princeton. He gets a vaccine for smallpox because many of the students didn't want to get this vaccine and it was kind of, health problem. And he ends up dying from the vaccine. So I think about like, I don't know. I think we live in such an individualistic time and our own sense of career and vocation can be just like, what do I think? And maybe my wife, And so I think it's powerful when people say, I serve something bigger than my own agenda and being willing to kind of work with other people. And another example of the field school is I didn't come up with the name, the field school. I didn't pick the Austin neighborhood where we're located, even though I lived in Austin at the time. There's a lot of things of the school that are the result of other great people. And when I see really dynamic organizations, often you need a really strong visionary leader, but they've only got so many good ideas. You need other people too, and a kind of culture that really, in a good way, argues things out, thinks about what's best, and leverages the unique strengths of those different people in the room.
Jeremy, I'd love to dive into something you said early on, and I think it's great idea, but how do I do that? And I think a lot of us have that same thought. And I'd love to get your take on how do you take what's seemingly a good idea on paper and successfully bring it through an execution stage, whether it be a school idea like this or a business idea, whatever it may be.
Yeah. A couple of things that come to mind. One is, I think a lot of good, I think there's too many founders or would-be founders who think they have this like 1 in a million never thought of thing. And that is almost never, ever the case, right? Like something that you want to do, someone else has already done in another time zone or in another part of town or whatever. And so finding the very best organizations to learn from, or like, we're going to take half of what they do and then half of what this other group does, but we're not like inventing something whole cloth from scratch. I just think there's so many good existing things that can be recombined in exciting ways. And I found the way that so many of the initial decisions that we had were not us, closing our eyes and coming up with a decision. It was learning from a few schools that we thought were world-class and saying, can we do that right now? Should it be different a little bit because of our context or our organizational stage? Should we blend these two? But I think just learning from other groups is one. Another thing I think about is the kind of importance of having the long view. So I think a lot of founders think about that 0 to 1 or like the first 6 months or the first 18 months. And you need to think about that. But you also need to kind of have in mind, like, what would we do now if we wanted to be healthy and thriving in 10 years? And that has helped me think about like talent acquisition. We've had some people where I was like, I wanted to hire them 5 years ago. And we had an initial conversation and then they take another job and I talk to them again. And then finally everything aligns and we're ready for it. But if you're always trying to solve the problem immediately in front of you, you kind of miss the investment opportunities in things that might come into maturity 6 months, 6 years from now. So that's another part of it.
It's really good.
I think the other part of it is just dogged execution. We've been blessed. A lot of people have liked the mission of the school and are kind of taken by the model that we have. And so I think it's now 82 schools that we have either helped start or helped reboot or like given counsel to. And many of those fly to Chicago to see it. And then in some cases, we've actually trained the whole staff team of other schools, a few in Florida, one in Michigan, one in Wisconsin. And the thing I tell them is once you get the kind of basic ideas, what the difference between success or failure is execution, especially for a school. Like we've got this kind of special DNA and all that. But what parents are asking is like, when will the lunch schedule be out? And like, where do I get the uniforms? And how will I know which books we need to get the summer before? And tell me a little bit about that teacher. Like there's a few important ideas and then there's 1,000 little tasks that you just have to get done. Yeah. And that doesn't mean you like start a list of 1,000 things. Like you need to be strategic in that. But I just think, especially in kind of visionary ideas sorts of organizations, we can spend a lot of time talking about like massaging the messaging and nuance and like, why are we doing it and stuff like that. And I just think that stuff matters, but eventually it's going to matter a lot more whether you can execute, whether you ship it, whether it comes on time, whether you follow up when people email, whether there's clear kind of planning and a sense of like iterative learning for the organization. And so I think that being obsessed with just getting the stuff done early on is really important. Some people don't need to hear that, but I think a lot of visionary founders do need to hear that.
So much of what you're sharing is counterintuitive, maybe, or maybe not. Countercultural might be a better way to talk about it. One of our prior guests, Pete, loved to say, think long, not big. And I hear you say
that one, and I love that. I wrote that down, but that's easy to get that tattooed. I'm like,
if he had a dime for every time I said it, he'd have probably $10. But anywho, so many of your decisions, Jeremy, like training 82 other schools, like that's, if I were to build a business plan for a school, that probably wouldn't be in it. And I'm guessing you're probably not even taking any income from it.
Very little. No, it's like 1%.
Yeah, that's a cost center, as they like to say. What's the principle there? I mean, did you set out, or do you feel like you've always kind of thought differently? about how to operate and what success looks like? Or have these things made their way to you and you've seen the opportunity perhaps in real time?
Yeah, I love that. There's kind of two parts of it that I think about. One is a kind of Christian-y part, and then one I have to think about Teach for America, my time working there. But actually, let me start with the Teach for America part. So Teach for America is an interesting organization because it's a nonprofit that was started by a graduate of Princeton, really capable. And there was a whole infusion of kind of McKinsey, Deloitte folks working on this problem of kind of human capital in low-resourced public schools. And the culture of the organization when I was there was, I mean, it was like relentless. So they took almost I don't know, big law, big finance, Manhattan work hours and zeal, and then put that into a kind of public school setting on behalf of children. Sometimes for good and sometimes for ill. That wasn't always a good thing. But part of that culture was this desire to develop leaders all the time and a very open, fluid network of investing in the next generation. And so I remember like my boss's boss's boss one time was in Chicago from DC. This person had been a Rhodes Scholar, really, really accomplished, very connected politically. Teach for America had some very high profile donors. And this person was willing to sit down with me for coffee and just talk about what I wanted to do when I grew up and was very generous with his time. And then there was another woman, same way. She's gone on to now start a very successful organization that has, I think something like 1,000 employees. And she did the same thing. So there was this kind of investing in people with this belief that someday this is going to pay off big. We don't totally know how. I don't know how in 10 years you're going to be a great ally, but you are, and I'm just going to do it. And part of it was this kind of relentless, dogged belief that great leaders have a profound effect. They're like the key lever for any big change. And so that was a part of it. I just saw that normalcy of like, we're always going to invest in people and have the long view. The other thing I would say is, though, more on the Christian side, now a big part of my role is fundraising. And I didn't have any experience with that, but kind of adopting a more abundance mindset where you believe there is more value to be created ahead than all of the value created in the past behind us. And the way I think about it now is money is not the scarce resource of the field school. Even like my time or the time of our staff, that's not the scarcest resource. Something like virtue or trust in God or like us becoming the kind of people that we need to be, that is the scarce thing for all of us. And so the importance of deep wisdom or the kind of relational network in which you're vulnerable and comfortable, like admitting you don't get something or you need some help, that's the thing we have to treasure and prize. Everything else is downstream from that. And so, yeah, I feel like that attitude toward the world and seeing God's work in my own life or learning from wise people who've figured this a lot more than, I think of one donor one time, I was going to ask them for $2 million for this big building renovation plan that we needed to have. And he was like, I don't even really want to see the business plan. I want to talk about what you think God is doing here and what you think you and the rest of the field school team need to grow in to be ready for that. And it was a heart conversation, cares about the business plan, but not as much as the kind of who are the people and what are they oriented toward. That's the really important thing.
And Jeremy, I'd love to back up for just a second. And when you're sitting in a leader seat, obviously there's countless priorities and things that you're thinking through. Like, okay, we want to execute on this long list of items that are all probably accretive to the success of the school or the business or whatever the context is. How do you try to prioritize the right thing? Because I think as leaders, it's hard. It is easy to be like, oh yeah, we got to do that thing. But you realize it takes away from a million other things. And I think when you have kind of this undisciplined approach to it, it can be harmful. So how do you try to prioritize that as a leader when you're in an organization like that?
Yeah. I'm hoping to grow in this. I don't feel like I'm always doing it very well. The one area I know I'm not good at is just spending that time. This is one of your guests previously talked about this. Spending the time either the night before, the week before, or in the morning to say, what's the one or two things that I absolutely have to be focused on today? And maybe preserving an hour, 2 or 3, where you say, I'm obsessed with the key strategic lever here, not the 1,000 things in my inbox are coming on all sides over there. And being disciplined to take that time, knowing that it's worth it. Like you don't have to immediately just jump into kind of crisis management and things like that. I think another thing that's been helpful and actually a good fruit of needing to fundraise a lot of money every year is wise counsel from experienced mentors. And the way that they'll just ask questions and you're like, I've been spending 90 days like spinning around in circles on all these little things. And one sentence from you cut through all of that noise. And so just ongoing learnings from peers or mentors. The other thing though is that now I've had to learn, and it's like I'm asking this question in a new way because I needed to learn that discipline early on. And now I supervise leaders who in many cases have many direct reports and their own kind of universe of things to work on and priorities and short and long-term goals and things. And it's just striking how, I don't know what it is as human beings, but we are so fixated on the kind of tyranny of the urgent. And it's a learned discipline and habit of pausing and considering what is important for the long term, or the kind of key moral commitments that we're going to make, that it's like, we're going to put this stake on the ground and everything we'll do 1,000 things because of this early commitment. And we have to get it right. We have to know like what we're about. So for us, it would be so much easier to run the field school if half of our seats did not go to children from low-income homes, because the amount that they can actually pay for tuition is between like 1/10 and 1/4 of what it actually costs. And we now get 4 times as many applications as we have new seats. Wow. And so if we wanted to, we could just fill the school with middle and high income families. We wouldn't need to fundraise. There'd be all sorts of stability brought by that. But what has made the school a special place is this intentionality around racial and socioeconomic integration, and the way that causes everyone to be kind of ready to give in blessing and receive in blessing, because it's just like baked into it that we all are just one perspective in this kind of wider community at the table. And so I just think about all the things that God has done that have just been amazing and beautiful and lovely. It's depended on that commitment to bring to the front of the line children who are normally at the back. And we made that commitment, and every now and then you're like, boy, here's a way to make the budget work. But I think just starting from those principles, I think of people that have lots of integrity where they just say, I'm never going to do this thing, and making that commitment before the question is put to them, but they've kind of already made the decision. So living life in that kind of a way, I think is a kind of key principle to get you on the right foot for later on.
I want to kind of dig into the school element of your world, Jeremy, because it's important work. And I'm going to ask a question. It's kind of oriented towards the motivation. And I think it's hard for anyone to really know their true motivation. But let me give you this question and see how it sits with you. What is one thing through the field school that you want to take responsibility for, that you will never get credit for, but you know when it's done, it was important, and that it would not have happened if you were not there?
Yeah. Ooh. The first thing I'll say is, as preamble, is like, there's just been unbelievable contributions from so many people. And I kind of mentioned that already. So yeah, that's the first thing. I think the way that I feel uniquely suited for it right now is we have a uniquely integrative community. So I've already talked about racial and socioeconomically and how rare that is for schools in the city. But there's other ways that's true as well. So one surprise has been, this year we serve 18 pastors' families, lots of people that minister around the city and are blessed by the school, and it anchors them. that wasn't like part of our business plan initially, but we really served that group. But we also serve families from 50 different churches. And so the different church traditions, I had this professor in college who would talk about the ecumenical Olympics and how like maybe the Baptists are going to win on like evangelism and the Anglicans are going to win on stately liturgy and the Australians are going to win on like stadium rock anthems. Like they all have something to bring to bless the kind of larger community. Right. And as a school, we've really been blessed by that. It's neat serving international families. So we've served some missionary families that have gone to, we just had a family leave for Nigeria with another family that just came here from Lebanon. So like lots of the global church connections has been fun. Another one though that I think is unique to me is trying to provide a space in a very polarizing political climate to say, among people, we are all people. We all care about our kids. We all want to see our neighborhoods thriving. We all want great opportunity and religious liberty and excellence. We all want to see like this community improve.
Yeah.
And I've felt like I'm relatively conservative theologically and politically, but we serve a lot of families that are not from that perspective. And it's been great to, in the last 8 years, just say, we're in this together and we're going to lock arms and we're going to talk about issues, but we're not going to fight. And we're going to see how we all improve and are enriched by the kind of sharing of perspectives. I've been really blessed by that. And it's been fun to see how that's kind of like brought urban and suburban together, sometimes high income and low income together. I just think that's so healthy and good. And it's on one level, it's like, oh man, what a unique school model. At the same time, I think this is what the church has been called to be at all times, that there be wealth and poverty together, that there be some people that are more like academically wired and some people that work with their hands. Young and old together is something like we live in an increasingly age segregated space. And so just being an integrated school across many dimensions to me has been, it's kind of like ordinary, but it's felt like our secret sauce. It's been so helpful for me personally to be enriched. And then seeing our kids and our families, like at the beginning of the school day, we have this thing called lauds where we read a psalm and sing a song together and pray. And something like 40 parents just stay for that. Like they drop their kids off and they stay because it's just a really special little moment as a community, and then they go to work.
If I had to summarize that, I would say that's really awesome. Thank you for that. Creating an open dialogue and a celebration of the diverse and beautiful giftings that everybody has in a overly polarized and political world.
Yeah.
That's
one thing I would just
mission.
One thing I would just add to that too, is maybe the unique thing I have is an important role for the kind of senior leader is discerner. Like, what are the different gifts of the people here? How can we better leverage those? Are we blocking something special that someone could have? Or when do I kind of need to guard or protect our mission? That's a key part of my role of helping all of the things we want to encourage to thrive, and then sort of being watchful of things that might not be helpful.
Yeah.
Jeremy, diving in a little bit on the school front, I mean, you can probably comment better, but some of the kind of curriculum and skill things that you guys focus on seem like they're a little more, and you could probably better phrase this, but hands-on, personal growth related type stuff. I think that's in the education system, especially, like there's something to be said for learning the actual like the subjects and things, but I think sometimes learning the personal growth side of things, the hands-on things that can be a little bit absent sometimes. So how do you feel like that plays a role in building a foundation for some of these kids as they, go through the field school and then beyond?
Yeah. The way I talk about it is I felt like when I was a public school teacher, there was like a big stopwatch that started on the first day of school. And then when we were going to take the standardized test, like that's the finish line. So we have a 9-month window. And I say at our admissions time, that's too small of a goal. Even something like in Chicago, the selective enrollment high school system, or getting into an Ivy League school or a STEM field career, or even a well-lived life, in our view, is too small. We have a kind of eternal horizon ahead for our students. And what we've said is training their affections to delight in things that are good and true and beautiful is the kind of long game for thriving in any industry or field or vocation, and recognizing they've been wired differently. Some of them are going to be really great HVAC, contractors someday. Some will start companies. Some will be artists. Some will build amazing homes. Some will be police officers, and not forcing everyone sort of into the same lane, but also saying we're all called to excellence. We're all called to kind of delight in things that are right and good. So viewing that as the kind of fundamental enterprise, and there's a lot of ways to think about that, like even on the time horizon thing, the way that you teach a child to learn, whether it's more phonics-based or sight words. Sight words got really popular in the last couple of decades, and that's where basically you memorize the high-frequency words that young readers are going to see a lot, but they're not learning the letter sounds, like how a word is put together. And so phonics is slower. But what ends up happening is you're giving a student the tools to teach themselves new words in the future. And so eventually they're going to fall in love with reading and they're going to feel confident as readers. Whereas a sight language, sight words approach will cause them to eventually feel like, I don't really know what's going on. Like this is an unfamiliar word and I don't know how to break it apart. And that causes them to almost like mistrust reading, sort of feel like I'm sort of lost here. And so that's how we think a lot about it, is getting students in a place where they will be lifelong learners, where their natural curiosity will be cultivated and stewarded. Another thing I think about, Ryan, is how every kid was wired for something differently, and you want school to be a place where there's some part of the day where they feel like a master, where they feel like a pro, where they're coming alive in that. And for some students, that's math. For some students, it's PE. For some students, it's music. For some students, it's the relational connections in the classroom. But teachers who have the time and the care to kind of look at each child and say, what were you made to bring that no one else could bring at this school, and developing that for them. And yeah, we kind of sadly live in a time where character formation and virtue is the last thing that a lot of schools are thinking about. Either we don't agree on what that looks like, or we do, and we just feel very hesitant to give any directive or kind of invite pursuit of things that are noble and hard and lovely and marked by the fruits of the Spirit, stuff like that. So I think it's good. And the way that I think about it, the kind of guard for us is a lot of our board members and staff and donors send their own kids to the school. And so there's this kind of gut check of, is what happens in this room what I want for my own sons and daughters? Or is it like, yeah, we're like checking all the boxes of what a school is supposed to provide and like get off my back for everything else? No, if my own kids are there, it's like there are elements of the culture and the relational feel for it, or the things that they're putting in front of kids as worthy of their affections that I care about. And I think that's, again, part of our secret sauce is it's an integrated community. And so the people paying for it are kind of the clients too.
Yeah.
Need us helping kids. And it means we have to outcompete their other options. So there might be fantastic schools. We got to be better than them.
It's the purest form of skin in the game, I think.
Exactly.
To a school. So I love that. I love aligned incentives. I imagine being head of school is just like, with as many students as you have and the way that kids are, there's just like challenges every day. Like there's probably never a day where you're like, that was just really smooth, would be my guess. And of course, I don't know if you feel like you're still in the launch phase. I'm guessing you don't. But starting any business, starting any school just comes with a lot of discomfort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could you just speak to, whether it's on a day-to-day basis or more macro, like the relationship that you have, the mindset you have towards pain, towards discomfort, and what that has done for you in terms of your growth as a leader?
Yeah, that I laugh because I was recently talking to someone. This was not school focused. We were talking about parenting, and they were kind of like joking because they were like, I mean, we just love pain in our family. Like our whole goal is to find painful things and do those things.
That's awesome.
We're anti-fun. And they're not anti-fun. They love fun. But this kind of belief, I'm going to butcher it, but I spent the first 6 years of my life in China. And there's this kind of phrase that talks about eating bitterness. And that being the kind of way, like suffering and trial is how growth is brought about and success. And we just live in such a cozy, comfortable, affirming, everything easy, nice, predictable, stable. And I just don't think that's how people grow. I don't think that's like born itself out in the last 50 years in America. No, so Mark, I am very much a like, oh, let's embrace the hard. And that can go too far. You know, like sometimes people are like, I should do it just because it's hard. No other reason. So I've definitely done that sometimes, and I want to be gentle with children. But you're right. Schools are unpredictable environments. One thing that, like in our first year, the building that we were renting had a fire in it, an actual fire. So it wasn't a fire drill. It was like actual fire.
Get out of it.
And then 6 weeks into the school launch, we had gotten a provisional business license to operate in this building, but it had been approved in the municipality by kind of the junior person of that office. And there was a newspaper article written about the field school, and the senior person read that article and they were like, I never approved this provisional business license. So they call me in and they say, we're going to need to shut down the school. And then once you get the permanent approval, then you can relaunch. And my blood pressure just, goes through the roof. And I say, we can't do that. Like, there are 45 children who depend on our school being open tomorrow. We have to figure something out. We kind of argue a little bit. They leave the room. They bring in their supervisor. In the end, we were able to keep the doors open. But there's just been lots and lots of stories like that where you just don't know what's going to happen. Kids, I love kids. It's fun because there's a sense of like unexpected possibility. C.S. Lewis has this line who he's like, who of us doesn't want the kind of like endless zest for life that children have?
Beautiful.
Of course, at times it's misdirected and it can be inconvenient, but it kind of keeps us young, and there's a childlike faith that we're all called to have. So I love it. But yeah, it can be disruptive. My office is off of the like corridor to go to lunch. So every kid going to lunch every day, I kind of hear them. They like go and stuff. But it's beautiful and it's good. And
it is, man.
It creates a kind of intergenerational, like, hey, we're all learning from each other.
Ryan and I talk about this all the time. Our society wants to give us instant gratification, comfort. And there's no way that is the recipe for growth, And I think the American dream is a bit of a lie. Yeah. This idea of like, have your house, have your W-2, insurance covers everything. You're not at risk. There's no risk here. Everything's okay.
And I see a lot of people parenting out of that fear of the unknown or fear of danger. And there's a mentor of mine, he says, you can either be disciplined now or you can be disappointed later. And that applies to like growing your own company. It applies to your own health. I think the place it applies, though, that we don't often think about is it applies to parenting. You can be disciplined now or you can be disappointed later. And I see a lot of parents that have a kind of instinct toward nurturing children as opposed to empowering and equipping adults, like preparing them to go out on mission. Like, that's our job, is to get you ready for whatever hard thing God has.
It's not to be their friend. It's not to be their
and that doesn't mean you're grouchy and like mean about everything. But there's this sense of like, hey, I'm not like what you want when you're 5 isn't our focus right now. It's on what you'll need when you're 50. And that's our focus.
It's kind of the ethos of this whole initiative that Mark and I have been getting behind the last couple of months is just every story is like a reiteration of itself where through the hardship comes the skills that you are going to hopefully set you up for just long-term success in life. And that can be defined in a lot of different ways. But I look at myself, school wasn't easy when I grew up, but I look back and I'm like, gosh, those years, like it's this weird balance, whether it's like early stage education or it's later in life. It's like when you're in the midst of like in the middle of those problems, it's like, oh, it's traumatic and you want to get out of it. But then you look back, you're like, man, those were some of the most formative experiences. So it's this weird dichotomy. It's like you want to get out of it, but you know it's going to be good for you. And it's just, it's kind of a weird feeling.
Yeah, that resonates with me. I also feel like, Ryan, sometimes we can mistake kind of in that American dream that like being disciplined means being busy, or it means being kind of like loading on a bunch of different challenges. And that, I don't think that's the right path either. I think sometimes it's a kind of quiet, slow, hard road, not a like frenetic, like busy, just throwing random things on because they're hard road.
Jeremy, as we kind of get to the finish line here of the conversation, if someone's listening and is feeling compelled by what you're doing with the field school, because I mean, just speaking personally, I just think it's a beautiful model. And my wife is a classical educator herself, so we believe in that structure of education. What are the ways folks can engage or support or even be a part of what you're doing through the field school?
Yeah. We're on the west side of Chicago in the Austin neighborhood. And we love having visitors. If anyone's local and would like to see it, our website is thefieldsschool.org. And we have a lot of resources there. It's a number. What makes the school possible is we have more than 100 people who basically stand in the gap between what a low-income family can realistically afford and what it actually costs. And that's a neat way. That program allows people to be paired with students in a grade. You're invited to the school. You get a thank you note. You learn a little bit about what they are studying that year in that class. So that's a good program. We also have some volunteer opportunities where great people lead a chess club or tutoring during the day, or we've had a few kind of work days. We bought this abandoned public school campus in the Austin neighborhood. And so the last couple of years we've been renovating that, which has been a lot of fun. So yeah, people can find out more about us on the website, and my contact information is there.
It's awesome.
Well, as we get close to wrap up, like Mark said, Jeremy, one of the things that we like to close with often is obviously you have a wealth of experience with building field school. If you were to rewind the clock 10, 15 plus years and give guidance to your younger self, what would be some of the things that you would say, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would say two things. The first thing I would say is find people that you want to be like and just follow them around, bribe them, do whatever you have to. But I was giving some advice to a younger person. I said, find a company that is led by some people that you really admire and do whatever you can to work there. There's no substitute for learning from great people. And it's not like a 20% benefit to you. It's a multiplicative benefit over the course of your life. So find great people, whether they're friends, a spouse, a mentor, a company to work for. Like, become obsessed with finding the people that you want to be like. James Clear has this line where he says, the way to make a habit stick is to join a community where that behavior is normal. So just get around the people where you're like, that's who we are. That's who I want to be. I'm just going to like be that group. My other tip would be doing things well, one at a time. We just live in such a culture that's inundated with distraction and possibility. I just see how unhelpful that is. So when you're reading a book, like really read that book. And when you're out in nature, be there. And when you're in a job, even if you're kind of thinking about the next job, do that job really, really well and squeeze all the lessons that you can out of that time. I was a young, impatient man. And it's funny because I remember talking to the president of a university that I was hosting. And I said, man, I already feel like I'm getting old. I'm running out of time. And I'm thinking about doing this program, but it takes so long. And he said, Moses was a shepherd for 40 years. And God used that time in the wilderness to prepare him to lead others into the wilderness. And that's easy to say when you're a little bit older, but it's true. It's just doing the right thing at the right pace is never, you're not going to regret that, even if you feel a little bit like it's taking longer than you wanted to. And I've been able to see now, even with some of our younger staff, we have two in particular, they're both very young. They had the most kind of servant-oriented attitude toward their role. They did not need some badge or to be advanced faster. And God brought circumstances around where they ended up getting tons of responsibility. And they'd been faithful with little and they were ready for much. So just trusting those principles and knowing that the right thing will come when it's supposed to come.
Yeah, man, that's really good. Great. Jeremy, we really appreciate it. That resonates really, that James Clear comment, join a community where those habits are normal. And I think I think at our core, that's what Ryan and I are trying to do here. Yeah. Find people who care about being leaders, care about being resilient, and care about making the world into something better than what it has been. And I really appreciate the work you're doing at Field School and see all of those components full well in your heart and your passion for the work you do. So thanks for being here and thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks for your good. I enjoyed your previous episodes and look forward to the ones in the future.
Thanks, Jeremy. Pleasure, man.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks for engaging with this episode of the Masters of Resilience podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend or colleague. Stay up to date on all the latest episodes and get exclusive resources at mastersofresilience.com. We'll see you next time.